Ollie, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm very well, Nick. How are you?
Good, mate. Thank you for coming down. Obviously, you've had the journey from Bristol
Yeah.
on the mega bus, which has been fun, but we got here in the end, just in a nick of time. So I'm going to jump right in and ask you the question that I ask everyone. And the first question I'd like to ask you is, what is your earliest memory of alcohol? And it doesn't necessarily have to be drinking it. It can just be being around it.
I suppose my earliest memory of drinking and seeing people drinking would be on holiday with my parents in the 80s. They weren't massive drinkers, but they did it. You know, and there was booze in the house, and my dad was always given some really, really nice whiskey, which he'd have with cigars and whiskey and whatever. But I remember being on holiday, I think in Tunisia in about 88, and coming back from like playing and being really thirsty and drinking some ouzo, thinking it was lemonade, and it was horrible. It was absolutely horrible.
That was your first experience?
That was my first experience with drinking alcohol and going, that tastes absolutely disgusting.
How old was you then?
88, I'd have been 10.
10.
Yeah.
So moving forward then a little bit to the first time that I guess you drunk without it being an accident, I guess would be the way to put it. What was that experience like?
Pretty horrific. So it was New Year's Eve, and I think we drank some whiskey and something else. I want to say it was like Bacardi or Vincenzo or something. It would have been about 92. And I ended up trying to strangle a friend of mine with a telephone cord because everybody had phones that were on walls. So I strangled that. The Samaritans had to get called. And a friend of mine, who I think was called Paul Goldberg, had to go and get his older brother or his older sister from up the road. She was quite a bit older and she knew what to do. And like, she put me in the shower. It was horrific.
And at what age are you there?
Yeah, I'd have been 13, 14.
13, 14.
Yeah, and that was the first time I drank.
So you obviously, what was that? What did you feel like, those sort of feelings and experiences after that first experience drinking? Because, you know, it sounds to me like that's a sign, isn't it?
That was a sign, really. I can't remember, but it wasn't great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't great.
What about, so that's your first experience drinking. Obviously, I'm assuming you went back to drink more after that occasion. So how did your sort of drinking progress? Because what I find really interesting as sort of addicts, we have this ability to fool ourselves into thinking that actually that was just a one-off occasion and it won't happen again. What was your experience moving forward after that?
My experience moving forward after that was mostly weed.
Right.
It was trying to get alcohol was really difficult. I think it's even harder now from what I can tell. But as you can imagine, like I was tiny. I didn't look at it even with fake ID. So I smoked hash till I was about 16, 17, with some alcohol here and some alcohol there. But that was my thing. But as soon as I started drinking, probably when I went into the workplace, being a chef, you always get a couple of pints. And I'd always forgotten this, but back in 1996, I worked in a hotel in Derby, and I was nicking a bottle of wine every night after work to drink alone in my room, watching The Word or whatever late night Channel 4.
Yeah.
When it was a good channel was on. So I'd forgotten all about that until a couple of years ago, and it was like, yeah, I mean, that's like you're stealing.
Yeah.
Which is a massive part of my backstory as well. And I was taking a bottle of wine every night, but I didn't see it. But in terms of like the pattern of it coming in, it was quite slow and gradual for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think once I discovered that it changed how I felt. That's what happens first, isn't it? First of all, you get hooked on alcohol, changing how you feel. Then you get hooked on alcohol. So I got hooked on alcohol, changing how I felt. I guess pretty much from my teens. Do you know what I mean? The seed was planted.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on it there a little bit as well. So you mentioned that you still are a chef. But you said that when you started working in that environment, you started to drink a little bit more. So you was leaning more towards sort of weed and hash. How do you think that the environment that you were working in played a part in leaning back towards alcohol?
Yeah, undoubtedly. Because it was accessible, it was the culture. I was a kid. I wanted to be around the older guys. I know what it's like when you're that age. I think you said you left school at like 16, 17 and went on to site. I mean, the boss is the boss, isn't he? He's just an old guy. Like, you know, he's the boss. You're like, shut up. But the guy that's like 23, 24, has got the car, the girl, whatever, you're like, hey, he's a bit cool, you know? And especially if they're good at their job, you start modelling them, don't you? You start modelling them. If they're tipping tipping booze down their neck and offering you a pint, you're not gonna say no, are you?
No.
So yeah, that was definitely a factor. I was in the right environment. If I was looking to get fucked up, which I was definitely, I was definitely in the right place.
Yeah. So you think that obviously, like you said, you have that natural thing where you kind of look up to people and you assume that they're doing well. I know I definitely resonate from a construction standpoint because, like you said, I come out of school at 16, 17. I was in college sort of pursuing music on one side, and then the other side I was labouring on a building site. And everybody I looked up to was either a labourer who would work and get paid on a Friday, and like you said, it wasn't that glamorous, but he would do all of his wages on the Friday night, and it was all something that we'd all come in on a Monday and talk about. Is that a similar environment in sort of the chefing industry?
Yeah, exactly that. You'd go out after work. But I don't think payday was that much of a big deal, but the going out after work was a big part of it, and especially if you were working in hotels, there'd be like a broad spectrum of people out and about. So there'd be like the housekeepers, there'd be some of the grounds guys, there'd be the bar. So you'd have your little. So it was just like a sort of ready-made social life. And one of the things I liked as well, I'm not going to lie, is I know what it's like on building sites. Although I get the impression it probably is quite diverse. Is there was like, I worked for a French company, so there was a lot of French guys, but we also had ties with a college in Sweden. So there was like Swedish guys who would bring their girlfriends over. There was Italian guys. I came from quite a narrow, I suppose, white middle-class Edinburgh upbringing, and all of a sudden I was meeting, like the guy that I reported to directly in the kitchen was from Mauritius, I mean, that's at 17, 18, if you want to, I found that quite interesting. Do you know what I mean? You're having a pint, you're like, what's life like in Mauritius? What are you doing over here? And like he'd tell you, I'd been having the same conversations with the same people up until that point. So that I also found that quite attractive. Maybe it's a Scottish or an Irish thing. It's like, let's get talking,
no, I think that is a good point, because I think that there's a social lubricant side of alcohol as well, isn't there? That like in that environment, and you touched on it and you said it really well, is that you don't really get addicted to sort of drugs and alcohol straight away. You're getting addicted to that feeling, and it can start as something that is a social thing. And I think it's probably more so back in, how long ago is it we're talking now?
We're talking, tail end of the 90s, early 90s. Yeah.
Which is like a total different environment around it now. But I think that was such a societal norm, and it still is. It's a way that we socialise. And it, like you said, it slowly gets to a point where it's no longer fun. How did your sort of drinking career along with your career progress? So obviously as you start to get into this world, you're drinking more, you're working with all these different people from around the world. And what age did you say you was there? About 17?
Yeah, 17, 18, I started to work in really, really serious kitchens. So I got really ambitious. So I suppose I should put a couple of the big cards on the table right now. So I do come from significant trauma.
Yeah.
So my father died in 91, I was 13. And then I was sexually abused through the church from sort of 15 to when I left Edinburgh when I was 16. So that's going to impact you.
Yeah,
that's going to impact you absolutely massively. And it's one of the things I have found, that a lot of like deep addiction, often there's a significant bit of trauma in the background. And yeah, so there's no point in lying, getting out of my head was incredibly attractive. It stymied those enormous feelings that I hadn't I'd grown up in quite an emotionally stunted house anyhow. So like, I hadn't grown up with sort of role models that were talking about things. I was young when that happened. So I just had no coping skills.
Yeah.
But I also, at the same time, big card on the table, I don't buy into the disease philosophy, but that's just me. If you're out there listening to this and you think you have a disease of alcoholism or whatever word it is you use, that's fine. Not for me. I think I'd have drunk anyhow, Nick.
Yeah.
I think I'd have found it. I'm such a full-on personality. I'd have found something else. It might have been sex. It might have been drugs. It might have been racing. I'd have found something to change how I feel with a destructive edge to it. I think I'd have gone.
Do you think you would have gone that way regardless of the trauma that you faced anyway?
I don't think I'd have gone as far, but I'd have gone up to my knees. Or do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'd have took a damn good look. I know how I'm built. Do you know what I mean? I've got jeopardy in me.
Yeah.
So once I learned for myself that alcohol suppressed those feelings, I also had a massive chef Scottish chef alcohol personality. I think a lot of us do, don't you? You cultivate this persona to go with it. You know, I loved being this larger than life mentalist. You know, I thought it made me really popular and really funny and really cool. And for a brief period of time, it did. Do you know what I mean? I think you and I spoke about, didn't we, being around the older guys, getting promoted, I got laid, I made some money, blah, blah, blah. But it probably ended about 2 years earlier than I even think it did.
Right, yeah.
But it's, once alcohol gets into you, it's really speedy, isn't it? Like I used to have a sort of 4 or 5 pints and I'd be done, you know. And I remember very, very quickly, within about a sort of year. So I started drinking hardcore in the year 2000. And look at the size of me. I could do 10, 12 pints.
Yeah.
You know, pretty easily, you know. And I wasn't alone. And I guess that's the thing, isn't it? Is that you find places to go. Like initially you start drinking with these people who, like, you know, will cut the fuck loose, but only on a Saturday or a Friday. You start doing it on a Wednesday or a Thursday. Well, you've got to start finding people that do it on a Wednesday or a Thursday. Then you've got to start finding people that it's like, do you know what, mate? That's just what I do. You know, so you find where to go, don't you? So that was also a part of the progression for me, was finding chefs or like-minded people. And if you live in a city, it's not hard to find it past midnight, is it? The places where it's like, yeah, why are you in here getting absolutely off your head at 1 o'clock in the morning? We want to be at work at 8.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, it's that you found your tribe, haven't you?
Yeah, so I think that is another thing, isn't it? That you don't really consider. Because I used to do something similar in regards to the work environment. So I've mentioned it a couple of times before, but I would leave jobs because I was convinced it was the jobs that were the issue. But I would go to a new company and I'd find the same group of people that wanted to go for a beer on a Tuesday afternoon or wanted to go for a beer every night. And it didn't matter where I was, I would find those people. I'd kind of seek them out. In the same way with drugs as well. I used to be able to have a knack for finding drugs anywhere in the world. You know, go on holiday and all my mates would be like, oh, we need to get something, where we're going to go, where we're going to be, like, just give us 10 minutes, and you'd find what you were looking for. And I think you touched on it as well. Like you said, you know, you went through some pretty traumatic things, and thank you for sharing that, because it's a brave thing to do. You know, I haven't really spoken about that subject yet on the podcast. So I think for me, what I would like to sort of ask is, like, at what point did you decide enough was enough with drinking, and you've gone from suppressing your feelings a lot of the time to all of a sudden having to deal with them? And I kind of want to talk a little bit about the journey you've gone on. 19 years, Ollie, that is fucking amazing.
Yeah, thank you.
You should be proud of yourself. That is really amazing. And how did you get to, I guess, rock bottom, if you want to call it that? What was that moment? And then I really want to talk about the longevity of your sobriety, because I think, you know, someone who's only 2 years in.
There's no only.
Yeah, okay. Well, 2 years in, I feel that I'm going to have to change and adapt over the years. And I think you've obviously a perfect example of that. But what was the rock bottom moment for you?
I suppose the ultimate rock bottom for me would be when I was hospitalised spring, summer 2005. So I came to at the bottom of some stairs, surrounded by ambulance guys, struggling to get air into me. Clearly something had happened. I'd literally just started a new job. I'd been there about a week and a half. Probably a little bit like building sites in terms of male dominated. Like, you've got to sort of not fight, but you've got to fight your way in. So I wasn't established. I'd had this massive fit. I hadn't been there long enough. Nobody really cared. And the ship had to keep sailing, so to speak. So I'd also just prepped this massive turbot. So I was carted off to hospital. I was kept in overnight. I stunk of fish. And nobody came to visit me. You know, nobody came to visit me. And I knew why. Didn't have to do a massive deep dive on that. You know, I kind of knew why that was. I was a real liar. I was a real thief. And anyhow, anyhow, so I was like, right, I know why I'm here. You know, I know why I'm here. It was my kidneys. I had a massive fit. So I lied to this nurse about living in another part of Bristol. She was like, it says here, according to your notes, you live in Bedminster. What do you mean you live in Frenchy? I went, no, I live in Frenchy. She goes, well, we'd have took you to Frenchy Hospital, Oliver. And I was just so skilled. And I suppose I was very good at knowing who I could lie to and who I couldn't. It's like you with the drugs. Like, if you want something, you know where to look.
Yeah.
You know? So anyhow, she went and got me some money to get the bus home. And all I did was just walk to a really famous pub in Bristol called the White Hart, which is outside the bus station on this glorious summer's day. And I sat outside in my chef's gear, stinking of fish, been kept in overnight, having a pint. And I had no control over it. And just the night before, I'd been in the BRI going, right, dickhead, this is real. This is really, and mine isn't a story of denial. Like I'd always known, and I suppose inside me, I knew I was going to have to face it at some point. But when I did have to face it, as it is for all of us, it's 10 times what you think it's going to be. And it often takes a few cracks of the whip. So I can't exactly be sure, but I remember it was very, very hot. So let's be conservative and say it was early May. It took me until the 4th of October of that year to stay stopped. Like that's how long I was trying for. And that interim period, Nick, was hell. It was hell. I'd never felt so isolated. I went back to hospital twice off the back of that. Every time I drank, it was like I was going through the floorboards. And I just reached a point. I was looking at my flat window, and there was a couple, and they had this incredible closeness. And they had a staffy. I bloody love staffies. And I remember looking at the dog thinking, I'd do anything to be that dog. Look at that little four-legged fucker. Do you know what I mean? He's loved.
Yeah.
He's loved. I mean, never mind the couple that were in love, glorious sunny day, the world around us, all the things I value these days. I was just looking at the dog thinking, I bloody love that. And I remember across the course of that day, coming to realize, looking back on my experience as an alcoholic, my choice, that I'd been in similar spots before and I'd always survived, but it had never got better. So whatever was coming next, for the first time ever, I was like, I don't want to know what that is. Like, this is the worst it's ever been. Whatever's coming next, nah, fuck that. I'm going to go, and the first thing is I'm going to have to stop drinking. Like, I'm genuinely going to have to get a plan together around it. I'm probably going to have to go and get some medical help. I'm going to go and ask for some medical help. But whatever it is, at least I know whatever it is that's coming over the hill, because there always is, it won't happen. And that was actually enough.
Yeah, that's it's amazing. I mean, when you was talking about how you just wanted to be loved and seeing something as simple as a dog, and people say about being spiritual or whatever, I genuinely believe everything happens for a reason. I think that dog was there on that day almost and you took it as a sign, and people will say, oh, it's just a coincidence. I don't really believe in that, but I think what would be interesting is, I mean, sounds like, so it was October that year was your kind of day one, right? How did you feel on day one? Because a lot of people will be listening and they'll be in that space that you was in and I was in, and a lot of people have been in, where they decide like enough is enough, and it's that huge feeling of overwhelm. I know I felt it. What was your thoughts and feelings on that day one, if you can remember? I mean, it's a long time ago.
That is the thing. Uncertain, frightened, still very alone, and not knowing what was coming, but also knowing that I'd made quite a good decision. I think the thing I had to say is that it's a different era, it's a different time, and I think that anybody who's listening to this or watching this or whatever it comes in, you do need to put some kind of platform in place to stop drinking. The biggest differences I see these days in the community is that there seems to be a lot more accessibility now to stopping drinking, but there doesn't seem to be a great deal of sort of long-term support unless you want to go to AA or something. So I wasn't on social media until COVID.
Right.
But eventually I went to AA for many years and I left at lockdown. And my wife said, why don't you just go on Facebook and just type in sober? And there's like a bit of a rule in AA at that time of not really doing that. So I typed in sober, and of course, my wife was like, you want to check out Instagram? And she did Instagram. I think the first guy that came up was like Sober Dave or someone. And I was like, good Lord, there's a whole bloody community on here. So I opened an Instagram account, and it's just full of really, really good stuff. And one of the things you can't knock the community for is that it's not toxic, is it? It's a wonderful community. I mean, I DM'd you quite a while ago just to say, mate, that podcast's absolutely banging. Here we are.
Yeah.
I mean, that doesn't really happen in many areas. There's loads of chefs. I'm like, nice dishes, mate. Yeah, thanks for that. And that's it, So here's the big difference that I see. So when I decided to stop drinking, I went to go and see my doctor. Let's say I got there at 9:30. I was in front of my doctor for 9:45. That doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah, true.
For the first time ever, I said to somebody, I'm an alcoholic. And she was like, okay, what are we going to do? Within 10 days, I had an assessment meeting with an alcohol assessment company that was attached to the NHS. You'll wait 9 months for that now. From the back of that, I think within 2 weeks, I was offered 2 residential rehabs. One was in Coventry, one was in Bristol. I took the one in Bristol. There's no NHS rehabs anymore, Nick. You can go to rehab if you want, but you're going to have to pay, or you're going to have to go to an organisation that pays the rehabs to go there. You might not pay, but they'll be depending on getting funding from somewhere. That's all gone. It's all gone. So if you're on day one or you're in the first week now, you're living in a very different landscape than I am. You know, I got a medical detox. I was given Librium. We were piss tested every day. It was really strict, but I had an enormous amount of structure around me. But I remember my first day at rehab. I don't know how he got it through, but some bloke confessed that he drunk in the night in the group thing. I mean, he was escorted from the room. And there was another guy there who was his mate who like knew his cousin. He was like, I'm not fucking having this. I'm off. And I was like, and it was like being in the kitchen again. I was like, this is mayhem. But I was also like that. I was also like, they've just booted guys out for being pissed. It's like, I'm going to stay. I'm going to stay. But I will tell you this, and I think it's the advice I would give to anybody who is listening, is to listen, is to read all the content. Read all the content because it's going to resonate so much with you. And I knew that I was in the right place because for the first time in my life, I didn't say a fucking word.
Yeah.
I just sat in this room listening to people talking about their experiences. And I was like, all right. I'm not going to lie, there was parts of me, I was like, yeah, good luck with that, mate. Jesus, what an absolute dickhead you were. Yeah, your daughter's never going to speak to you again. But there was also people that I was like, yeah, I feel you.
Yeah.
I feel you. Yeah, God, that must have hurt. You know, and I was like, wow. And I was ruthless. I was a real cold blood. I wasn't violent. I was vile. I mean, I was a problematic drinker. So I had all these emotions going on. And for the first time ever, I was hearing people talking about drinking, but I wasn't drinking, and I was being honest by not talking. I was such a manipulator. So anybody who's in the first week, read all the content. That's the best thing about social media. You can follow, you can unfollow. There's lots of podcasts. There's lots of Quitlet. None of that stuff existed. You know, I mean, podcasts are probably my main thing now. They're just wonderful, you know. And what I love about a podcast as well is that it goes back to what I'm saying. I'm forced to listen. Do you know what I mean? Like social media, I can scroll forward. I can unfollow you. I don't have to read a book if I don't want to. You know, I can choose not to go to a meeting. You put a podcast on. Nick, can you stop talking, please? All I can do it is press pause. Do you know what I mean? I've got to hear what's being said. So that's my advice, is to really, really listen and look for people who are, and some people are going to be exactly where you are, but also as well, I've been where you are, but here I am at 19 years. I'm probably not the guy you need to listen to. You know, that person who's just got through their first Christmas, that's who you need to listen to.
Yeah.
You know, the person who's just that little bit further on than you, somebody who's got a month, who's got through a couple of birthdays, got through a wedding, got through an event, and you're in your first week, and it's like, oh, geez, I've got to put up with my sister at Christmas. How am I going to do that? I guarantee there'll be a social media post of somebody going, I got through Christmas with my brother, and here's what I did.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So
It's a really interesting point, because I actually, prior to this conversation happening, I had in my head that you was going to say it was a lot harder to get sober 19 years ago. The reason being, you know, the stigma around being an addict, sobriety, living a healthier lifestyle has changed massively. Did you have any of that stigma back in sort of 19 years ago? Did you have any challenges that you faced that, you know, would be different to what people are facing now?
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because I've realised that what I said was wrong. So there was more support initially and no support afterwards, whereas now there's no medical support. There's limited medical support at the beginning now. So when I left treatment, I was basically told, here's your options. You can fly solo, even though I knew that wasn't a good idea. You can get God, go to church. I wasn't going to do that. Or you can go to AA. There was Recovery Dynamics. They've gone defunct. Or there was another one which still exists. I've forgotten what it's called now. I was like, good grief. And that was all there was. There wasn't any of this. There wasn't like you could join a Facebook group. You could listen to podcasts. There was like literally, we left rehab, and I was like, wow. You were literally like, what?
Yeah.
What now? You know, I went there for 2 weeks. I did a drop-in clinic on a Wednesday. So yeah, there wasn't much support after you'd initially got it. That's why people went to AA. I think the stigma will always be there. I think the stigma will always be there. I mean, the world has changed. I mean, you take a look at, society's far more diverse now. I know they've had to bring in an Equality and Diversity Act because they've had to make it legal that you can't run down groups of society. I don't think you should, but that's always gonna exist.
Yeah.
That's always going to exist. I think there's people who are always going to be. I'm from Scotland. Especially the West even now is still very much divided, Catholic, Protestant. Like, it's still a thing. There's always going to be a reason to have a judgment on anybody. And I think if people have got a stigma for you for your alcoholism, there's nothing you can do about that. And I wasn't feeling it, and I certainly didn't care. But I think you do get a feel for it. So there was jobs where I would be open about it, and there was jobs where they don't know. So where I'm working now, I'm one of 3 openly recovering people in the building, but I work at a wellness centre, so it's probably open to it. I worked. Well, I've gone now. It doesn't matter. I worked in education as a chef for a number of years. Yeah, I wasn't going to volunteer it in that space.
Yeah.
No chance. Not that I was any kind of risk to kids, but there was kids around. I just thought, why have a little marker next to your name that it's like, yeah, this guy's in recovery. So I'm probably, yeah. I think you've got to know when to play it or when not. But it is tricky because I think in the first year and a half of getting sober, it's almost got to be a job.
Yeah.
It's almost got to be what you do to give yourself any chance.
I was going to ask that question. Like, you're on your own recovery journey of healing, right? And you're sort of further down the line than some people are. Does it ever stop? Because I personally don't think that recovery is something that ever stops, and it's something that you constantly have to work at. We've spoke a little bit offline about adapting your recovery over a certain period of time. So you touched on it there. The first year of sobriety and recovery for me was like a job. I was working it myself. I was all this inner trauma that I hadn't dealt with was coming up out of me. You can feel the shit wanting to go out of your body, and your response is to try and suppress it. So I tried to suppress it through other ways, maybe it might not have been drinking or using, but I'd do other things which I knew wasn't healthy for me. And I guess it's just kind of understanding how you've navigated over those years and what your experience is with your healing journey. You've got to heal from more than just, like you said, it's not the alcohol or the drugs that you're healing from, it's from all the trauma, isn't it, that you've been through. How have you maintained your sobriety for someone listening who's maybe 2-4 years in, like I am, and they're thinking, right, and I know you shouldn't because you should always keep it in the day, but people do. Your brain goes off into other places. What kind of advice would you give for people that are thinking about longevity in sobriety?
So thinking about longevity in sobriety, the first thing I would say is do think about it. Absolutely do.
Okay.
Dream long term. Absolutely. Yeah, I think if you've made a decision, I'm not going to drink, I think it's definitely something to hold on to yourself, that I'm never going to drink again. Before my wife, I was in a very challenging relationship with somebody. I came out of that financially very badly. I didn't drink. Within a year, my son was born. He was in a high dependency unit for the first 3 months of his life. And there was babies dying on that ward. It was a tough environment. I didn't even think about alcohol because I was focused on being a husband and a father. And it's because I've made my decision. I made my soul deep decision years ago to not drink again. So the only option you've really got is, well, I'm going to have to learn to bloody navigate this thing and unpick that trauma. And I know people say keep it in the day, but one of the things about going through a few cycles, which I do think is a couple of years, if I'm honest, all sobriety counts, but I think if you've been sober for sort of 2 or 3 years, it's a safe bet to say you'll have lived through something. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Within that time, if you're an adult, within that time frame, something that's like a massive rogue wave has come in, and you've got through it sober. You've clung on and you've come out of it. The storm's calmed, and all your geography's changed. And maybe you don't need to. Maybe you're allowed to. It's like, yeah, what I was doing worked. Or maybe it's like, actually, I need to pivot here. I'm hanging around. I'm with them. I'm with the wrong group of friends. I'm following the wrong people online. I'm not connected to a group. It's like, do you know what? I bloody love playing chess.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what the lads at work thought was funny. I bloody loved it. You need to keep eyes on where it is you're spending your time. But I think ultimately a lot of it comes down really to deep work and your willingness to do deep work. I see a lot of it on Instagram. It's like, I had 99 problems, but stopping drinking made 95 of them go away. And everyone goes, love it, mate. Well, the 4 that remain, they're probably why you were drinking in the first place.
Yeah, literally.
So you probably need to look at those. And your values and your beliefs change. Like what I admire in people now isn't what it was 10, 15 years ago. So that's going to impact my values and how I see myself. I was in AA for a long time, which was very, very good. I probably should have left it after about 10 years. I think it got to me to about 10 years, and I was like, I'm sick of being in these rooms. And it was because I'm not knocking it. I think it's a great organization. It's got its problems, everything has, but I'm not going to knock it. But I came to realize that I was 10 years from now, I'd still be having these same conversations here, and I just didn't want that, I think the word pivot in terms of refreshing your sobriety and changing what you do. So what works for the first 2 years isn't going to get you through the next 5. It's just not. I think it's very good to look at fitness and nutrition and take things up and to get your body well again after you've decimated it with alcohol. But that's not going to get you through. That's not going to get you through the next 4 or 5 years. But I think anybody who I see who's done a good few number of years, they all advocate some form of therapy or counselling or some kind of like deep internal audit. Because what addiction does is we've all got traits in us. Yeah. And ideally you move through life working on the eradication of those crappy traits. So my base setting is to lie, steal, and cheat, Nick. That's my base setting. I think even without alcohol, I'd have been that man. Yeah. So you throw alcohol into that. I am now an apex liar, thief, and cheat. And that's what happens with addiction. Anything that's good in your life, it just pushes it down, and all the tat rises up. So let's say, you've got a bit of a temper on you, or you're a bit selfish, but, your parents put a lot of work into you. You met some good mates at college or at uni, and somebody pointed out to you how selfish you are, and like, yeah. Then you start drinking massively heavily. 3 years down the line, you're just an insanely selfish bloke, and you just throw hands every time something doesn't go your way. That needs to be unpicked. That needs to be looked at. Where's that come from? So essentially, I've always just done things along those lines. I'm a real believer in doing the work. So at the minute, for the last 2 years, I've been really heavily into journaling. I'm a part of a journaling group online, and I know that will be what I do. I'll get a couple of years out of that, and you and I were talking on the way over in the train. So for where you are, what did you say you are, 2 and a bit years?
Yeah, just over 2 years.
Yeah. So the truth is, you probably don't need to do an enormous overhaul. And it's important that I say that. If you're listening to this thinking, fuck me, I'm coming up to 5 years, are you telling me I've got to change my whole life? No. But I know you've got an annoying thing going on that we've discussed, haven't we?
Yeah.
Like, you're going to need to deal with that. You need to make it. You're going to need to make that soul deep decision about it and stick to it, like you have with the no drinking, or it's just going to come back. And that's often what I say, is that like you've got something gnawing away at you the minute, and it's usually a relationship, maybe a relationship with your cat, but it's usually a relationship, and it's gnawing away at you. You have to look at those, and going for a damn long run, looking at your diet, isn't really going to fix it. You're going to have to be honest about, why do I feel like this? And a lot of things I see these days, like breath work, journaling, people chucking themselves in cold water. I think it's great because it just completely shocks you. You're just totally in the moment, and you come out of it with some new clarity.
I agree. I think one of the things that I do that helps me massively is being out in nature. I think something about being in a mountain somewhere can put your life into perspective, and it turns the noise off. There's a lot of internal noise in our heads, especially these days. You're connected to your phone, and when you're not connected to your phone and you're not on social media, someone's ringing you, or you're looking at your emails, and then when you're not looking at your emails, you got your headphones in because you need to listen to music, and it's like, if you don't give your brain the space of silence to really figure out what's going on. And I think, you said it, journaling and writing stuff down can give you that perspective that you need. And I think you're right. I know what I need to do deep down in my own issues that I'm having at the moment. I know what's the right thing to do. It's having the guts to do it. And I think that if you've had that long stint of sobriety, you can lean on that to go, if I've done that, I'm pretty sure anything else that's coming up, I can apply the same principles I did to my sobriety, which is exactly what you said. You go back and you look at all your personality traits and think, well, maybe, you know, and everyone says to me now, and probably to yourself as well, are you very self-aware? Yeah, I fucking wasn't, mate. 2 years ago,
I know.
I was not self-aware at all. I'd never willing to admit that I was selfish. I put drugs and alcohol before other people. I didn't ever want to admit that I would tell stupid little lies so that I could stay out longer, or, you know, all of these things. And I think you touched on it with journaling. Someone who's trying to find those things that help them, what would you suggest doing?
Okay, so here's one thing I really, really wanted to say. I think it's very, very easy in the online community to find people who have your drinking story. I don't know if you see it yourself. A lot of people I see who have huge followings, and I'm sure if you DM them or you go onto their coaching courses or whatever, they are telling you how to get from A to B. This is what I would do with you. But the biggest posts that always get the biggest tractions are always somebody talking about damn drinking, aren't they? So nice to wake up this morning without a hangover and blah, blah, blah. It's like, yeah, mate, it's absolutely great. All right, is that really how you're feeling today?
Yeah.
So I always say, look for the sobriety that you want. You know, one of the reasons I like your group, so I'm not, there's a lot of people in this, is it Drew? Is that the guy? He runs a half marathon, goes to work, Drew, that guy. Yeah, like I'm not, like I look at him and I'm like, good grief, mate. But I've also looked at a lot of people in that group, and my wife and I were on a holiday earlier on this year, and I was part of your group by this point, and it made me realize, it's like, am I doing all I can? You know, I'm a bit older, I'm 47, I've got, you know, I'm in a different place than you, you know, but I'm like, am I doing all I can? No, I'm not. I'm actually coasting. I'm doing quite a bit of coasting here. I'm coasting financially. I'm coasting with my health. You know, I put a lot of effort into my relationships, but like, so that's what's inspired me, and I've lived that. It's like, look for the sobriety you want, not your drinking stories. You're going to find loads of people online posting about drinking, giving it, woke up this morning, glorious. Find the person who's like, right, do you know what? I'm going to become a bodybuilder. If you're at home thinking, right, I want to get some muscles here, I guarantee you go on Instagram, put in sober bodybuilder, you're going to be spoiled for choices.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? The sober bricklayer, the sober chef. You'll find that person. That's who to follow initially at that time. You know, find somebody who's got the sobriety that you want. Become what you admire. All right. Early days, read everything, because you need that identification. You need to hear those stories that you realize, you know what, you weren't the worst. Not the best version of yourself, but you're not the out-and-out scumbag you thought you were. You behaved like this. A lot of us did. Drank like this. Got some regrets. Should have treated some people better. It's important that you take all that information because that's what embeds you into the community. But after a while, you've got to fine-tune it down to, I think, the groups, the number of people, various coaches or people that do podcasts or people who have got something that you want. And it's like, I'm going to follow you. Yeah, not to the letter, but I like what you've got, especially if they're posting authentically. And for me, that's the best part of the community.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the reason I do this podcast is because I want to speak to as many different people as possible. And I've taken small sections of all of their journeys and been like, I like a little bit of that, so I'm going to apply that to my life, and I'll try that. And then you speak to someone else and you think, I'm going to apply a little bit of that. Actually, it didn't really work for me. And I think that is important. I've never heard anyone say that, you know, look for somebody whose sobriety you want. I think a lot of people can also get lost in this sober Instagram space. And I know I have. I've gone through stints of posting stuff for the sake of posting stuff and chasing the wrong validation. And it's, you know, it's going back into those sort of selfish mentality of like, I'm doing this podcast so I can get a certain amount of likes, or I'm doing this post. And then when you start doing things just because you want to do them, and I've actually realised that for me, it's creativity. It's a huge part of my journey. If I'm not being creative, I will just flatline and I'll start to feel like shit. And I'll try to mask that by posting a shit video or doing something to just try and make myself be creative. But if I give myself the space and, like you said, look for inspiration, you know, I've done a bit of an audit on who I follow online recently as well for that exact reason, because I was following people that it was a lie. It wasn't authentic. It needs to be authentic.
Yeah, and I think that word, and that it gets a beating, doesn't it? Authenticity, it gets an absolute beating. But you know what? It's right, you know, because drinking is also such a lie.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, I mean, I used to think I was some bloody George Best, Steve McQueen hybrid. Do you know what I mean? I mean, I was, you know, my whole persona was a lie. I was drinking, so the lie increased. The only people that were attracted to me were also bullshitters. So you got to keep that bullshit ruse going on. The whole damn thing's a lie. You lie about who you're drinking. You lie about who you've lied to. You lie about who you've slept with. The whole damn thing's a lie. Then you get this incredible gift, you know, or something ignites within yourself, and you get sober. Which I'd imagine for most people listen to this, you're either into it or you're beginning to approach it. It's one of the hardest things you do. But why lie around it?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I've got it. Yeah, I think what I'll do is I'll just shoot myself in the foot around my sobriety. There we go. What could possibly happen? You know?
I think you touched on it there, like the word authenticity as well. I think if you've done not to sound like a wanker here, but if you've done the inner work, being not being authentic becomes more difficult because, you know, you start to get real with yourself, you get honest with yourself, and then you feel uncomfortable when you're in a situation that doesn't align with your values. So you start to call stuff out, and naturally it just filters out all of the shit in your life. And you only then, like you said, when you're lying, drinking and using, you attract other people that are lying, drinking and using. And when you stop lying, drinking and using, you attract people that have stopped doing that and are doing the things by being truthful and not drinking, and actually doing things that fulfill them and give them purpose in life. So I think it's a really good piece of advice.
Yeah, absolutely. The most recent thing I've had was last year. So I arrived to pick my son up late from school on a Friday. So it was bedlam, and I've got a Fiat 500. You can literally park the thing anywhere, and I did. And I came back with my son, and of course I boxed this guy in. He couldn't get into his vehicle. He was fuming, big guy, and I made a comment on his weight. And it just got tasty. And I'm not a tasty guy, but do you know what I mean? The bottom line is, Nick, I was in the wrong. I just didn't want to admit it.
Yeah.
So I built a whole thing around him. I remember just like looking at him like this. He told his daughters to get in the car. Bigger man than me. I did the whole thing in front of my son.
Yeah.
You know, all the way back. You know, my son thought it was hilarious. You know, my wife phoned me, and like my son was like demonstrating some of the things I'd said. Anyhow. A lot of middle-aged blokes. We all look the same, don't we? I like a lot of middle-aged blokes, don't they? I'm a bit fat, I'm bald, I've got tattoos. We all look the same. And it took me a while at the school to clock him. And I got that feeling. I went over, he saw me coming, and I just flat out apologised. Nick, I just flat out apologised. And he was like, thanks for that, mate. And now every time I see him, I get this, or I get a morning from him. And it's because I've got to go to that space 5 days a week to pick up one of the gifts of my life, which is my son's. My son's never seen me drunk. Hopefully he never will. My wife's never seen me drunk, vice versa. You know, we worked hard to get my son to a specialist school. He's deaf. Why would I toxify that with old behaviour? Oliver, you were in the wrong. Just go, do you know what, mate? You're right. I was running late because I'm unmanageable sometimes.
Yeah.
And I've parked how I wanted to do with no consideration for anyone else. I didn't have to perhaps give him that much self-awareness, but I could have took the initial thing that he'd said and gone, sorry, mate, and moved the damn vehicle.
Yeah.
You know?
I think it's important to say that it is easier said than done sometimes as well. And it is normal to do those sort of things, you know, like when you're constantly working on yourself, I get days all the time where I do go back into old habits and, you know, I might snap and I might just flip out at someone for no reason whatsoever. But it's probably because there's something like you said that is deep down, which I probably haven't dealt with. So it's not the fact that somebody's parts in front of me or the fact that I've missed the train. It's actually the fact that there's something deep inside of me which I haven't really dealt with yet, which is why I'm flipping out, you know. And I think it's okay to be like that, and it's just being aware. But like you said, it's them putting it right, and old Oliver wouldn't have gone back and put that right.
I'd had a whole story around it. I'd have been the injured party. I'd have been looking for vengeance in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
You know, and I think one of the reasons is it was the first time in years since I'd had something like that. You know, I don't get told to shut the fuck up anymore. I don't get pulled into tribunal meetings anymore.
Yeah.
I haven't had anybody take a swing at me anymore. I haven't been told to fuck off anymore. You know, that's not to say that I'm not perfect, but like that level of like, you know, I just didn't respect people's boundaries. You know.
Yeah.
I didn't understand what a boundary was because I was boundaryless. But I did know enough to know that I had made a decision that you know, I could feel myself impacting you, but it didn't bother me. Yeah, I wanted to get there. I wanted to get the money. I wanted to get the girl. I wanted to get the beer. I wanted your job.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, nobody likes anyone like that.
No.
Not really.
We've actually been speaking for almost an hour already.
Wow.
So I'm coming to the end of the podcast, and there's 2 questions that I ask everybody at the end of every podcast episode. And the first question I would like to ask you is, what would you say has been the biggest benefit to getting sober for yourself?
The biggest benefit to getting sober has probably been the fact that I have had to, through no choice, do deep work, which has ultimately made me a better version of a person than I think I probably would have been had I not started drinking. I know that sounds dark as sin, but I think I'd have been all right, perhaps. But through drinking and then having to get sober, I have paradoxically become somebody who I would like to think is a positive contributor to society.
Yeah, that's amazing. I've never heard anyone answer that question like that in 37 episodes, so I love that. And the final question that I've got is, what would be the one piece of advice that you wish you received at the beginning of your sobriety journey, which you would give to somebody else at the beginning of theirs?
You are surrounded by so many people who want you to be all you can be and to get sober and to stay sober. Find them as quickly as you can.
Yeah, it's great advice. It's true, isn't it? Find the community early on, and don't fight it. The war's over. You ain't got to keep fighting.
You haven't.
Just surrender.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, mate. That has been really interesting. And thank you for being so open and honest as well. You shared a lot of things that you didn't have to share, and I'm sure this episode will help a lot of people. And congratulations on you turned it around. It's 19 years now. You should be hugely proud of yourself.
Thank you very much. Well, that'll be you. That'll be you. It will be. I'll be looking out for it.
Hopefully. Thanks, mate.
No bother. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
No worries. Done, mate. How was that?
It was all right. God, is that an hour?
Yeah.